The sword and shield, an agile and flexible option, excellent for beginners. The hammer, mighty but slow, dealing devastating blows with careful timing. The lance, a defensive pick, able to deal damage safely in small openings. Bowguns, the ranged backline, hitting pinpoint damage and supporting with an array of status-inflicting shots. And the greatsword, a balanced option for those looking to attack and defend in equal measure. Together, they formed a harmonious group, taking advantage of their strengths and covering for each other's weaknesses. As a team, they took on any foe, laying low the greatest threats with deadly efficiency. But I'm boring you with an old tale. No one wants to hear stories like that anymore. Balance, as its name suggests, is a tricky dance. A complex calculation that must take many factors into consideration. The strength of a player, the options they have available to them, the parameters of enemies, skill levels, and so on. In Monster Hunter, the game balance has fluctuated wildly from game to game, and the manner in which the game is balanced has taken several forms. Today, let's talk about game balance in Monster Hunter throughout the series, and take a philosophical look at what it means for a game to be balanced, along with the pros and cons of each style. So sit back, move the video over to the second monitor, and enjoy. Balance can be a difficult topic to talk about. When looking for balance in a game, many people will be seeking different things. Do you want perfectly equalized performance across every playstyle? Or maybe you just want minimal viability, where every playstyle is at least capable of clearing all the content. Or maybe you want what I would call balance through unbalance, where performance varies wildly, but everything has its own niche. You can find many games that fit these categories, and Monster Hunter as well has found its place among them. In a previous video, I mentioned how early on, Monster Hunter took much of its inspiration from older online RPGs. I will recall that once again because Monster Hunter 1's balance philosophy was identical to the way those other games were balanced as well. Back then, balance was approached in a less individualistic sense. There was less focus on whether each class or playstyle could match up against one another, and instead looked at what does each one bring to a group. These games were largely meant to be played in groups, so it was more important that everyone should be able to benefit the group in some way, and feel valuable so that they could get invited to play with others. No one excelled at everything, but everyone excelled at something. A group was the sum of its parts. Monster Hunter 1 and 2 strongly resembled this as well. These were not games you were meant to really play alone. You were supposed to go online into the town and find people to play with. The balancing reflected this. If you were trying to play Monster Hunter 1 alone with Sword and Shield, you would likely experience something vastly different to someone doing the same thing with Greatsword, for example. However, in a group setting, everyone had their place and could contribute in their own ways. In this way, the balance was quite good. You would never encounter a situation where you thought, man, I wish we didn't have this hammer user on the team. There were really no weak links. Much of the variance in performance in these games could be owed to matchup dependence. With so many monsters with a variety of different attacks and fighting styles, some weapons simply dealt with some monsters better than others. But this is also what allowed weapons to stand out and have their own strengths and weaknesses when put together in a group. Over time, though, things changed. Starting from the portable titles and eventually bleeding into the mainline titles, Monster Hunter began looking to become more playable for solo players. An important part of making this viable was the balance, with the additions of new moves to existing weapons and adjustments of various motion values and modifiers, along with adjustments to monster stats. The game began getting balanced around minimal viability. Monster Hunter was still very much a game focused on the multiplayer experience. It was the quote-unquote true way to play the games. But with this shift in balance, it became viable that you could reasonably expect to play through the game with the weapon of your choice on your own. Around the time of the modern era of Monster Hunter, they started balancing around equalizing performance. Now, it should be noted that perfectly equalized performance is effectively impossible. That's not really the goal. The goal is to just get as close as possible to reduce major disparities between playstyles. One of the ways that this can be achieved is through homogenization, where playstyles begin to assimilate into one another and become less unique. Monster Hunter saw the beginning of this as early as 4th gen with the addition of weapon-agnostic moves like plunging attacks off ledges, and Generations Ultimate brought even more with styles that added similar moves to each weapon, but where it was most evident was in 5th gen. World brought with it an increase to mobility and sleekness to all weapons. Even classically plotting weapons like lance and gunlance saw an increase to their speed and mobility. Rise and Sunbreak's whole gimmick was adding some form of counter move to every single weapon. In the beginning, Wilds actually saw something of a decrease in homogenization, with the addition of new moves like guard clashes and offset attacks being unevenly distributed among the weapons, and even with weapons that shared these same moves having different strengths between them. This has changed with title updates, as some weapons have gained these moves which previously did not have them, and others have had their effectiveness increased to be more on par with the stronger ones. This has been largely due to player feedback that sought to have the weapons be more equalized in performance. But let's put a pause on this discussion for now, and keep what we've talked about so far in mind for later. Different people like different balancing styles. That's because none of these different styles are inherently better or worse than another. They all have their own pros and cons and accomplish a certain game design goal. As I said in the beginning, balance through unbalance was the way many early RPGs and the early Monhun games worked. Because these games were designed to be played cooperatively, and in the case of RPGs offer build diversity, it was important that every playstyle brought something unique to the table. As long as your chosen playstyle could do something that someone else might not be able to do, then you would be considered valuable by others, and they would want to play with you. This type of balancing helped create a kind of harmonious group ecosystem. However, it was not without its flaws. This type of balancing is especially susceptible to missteps in design. If, for example, a class is given some unique niche that in practice ends up not being seen as valuable by other players, then you basically will never get to join groups. This is a catastrophic failure point since the game is designed around joining groups. If you've chosen a bad class or a playstyle, then you don't get to play the game. Monster Hunter managed to mostly avoid this type of failure with only the sword and shield and light bowgun lacking what I would consider a strong niche, but not to an extent where it mattered. Minimal viability is quite popular in games still to this day. It's kind of the baseline balance that most games seek. Short of perfecting equalized balance, many games at least try to make sure every playstyle or class can accomplish the same things. Group-oriented RPGs with an emphasis on personal responsibility are much less common than they used to be, so of course balancing has changed to reflect this. This balancing type ensures that anyone who wants to play the game, regardless of whether they're playing alone or in coordinated groups, can play the game in their preferred way. This is a noble goal, but often one that runs up against community sentiment. In the modern day, the dominant mindset in many gaming communities, including Monster Hunter, is one of meta chasing and optimization. People want to play the best builds and do the most damage and be the most effective, and if they're behind others in those categories, then they consider it a flaw with the balancing of the game. Even if technically they're still able to clear all the content and join groups, psychologically it leaves them unsatisfied on a personal level. And so we come to equalized balance. This is the ultimate ideal situation, where performance is simply a concern of the past. You can choose any playstyle, any class, any build, and you'll be just as effective as everyone else. Many games strive for it, and many players desire it, but as ideals tend to go, it is idealistic. It's not something any game can realistically achieve, so instead it results in a constant whack-a-mole of adjusting outliers that are either too strong or too weak in an effort to find a middle ground, where everyone is within what can be considered an acceptable margin of each other. As I mentioned earlier, one of the consequences of this is homogenization, an extreme length that some devs are willing to go to in order to balance the game. The reason for this is because, theoretically, if every unique playstyle ultimately had the same abilities just with different aesthetics or thematic flavors, then it would actually be possible to balance everything perfectly. That, of course, comes at the cost of meaningful mechanical diversity. And so, we return to Monster Hunter. I've sort of avoided a certain critical aspect of this discussion that some may have picked up on by now, but Monster Hunter has classically been extremely poorly balanced despite all these changes to balancing over time. You can name any game and find several often extreme outliers. Monster Hunter 1 Lance could stagger lock. 4U Chargeblade and Insect Glaive melted monsters. GU Valor Heavy Bowgun was a war crime of epic proportions. The list goes on. In the modern day, we see the aforementioned balancing whack-a-mole taking place through title updates, and despite that, people are still often unsatisfied with it. And so it really makes you wonder, what was it all for? Weapon playstyles in Monster Hunter have gotten increasingly homogenized over time, but we've gained little in exchange, in the grand scheme. At the same time, it's an unavoidable path to some extent. The games are designed for solo play and quick drop-in, drop-out matchmaking nowadays. This type of balancing is what people clamor for despite its flaws, not to mention the gameplay appeal. Slapping a flashy counter onto your game is a trend that has hit practically every single game nowadays. It's an easy way to create visceral, spectacle gameplay that makes the player feel skillful, despite most counters in the modern day being very forgiving and easy to land. Monster Hunter as well has leaned into this flashy spectacle gameplay style. Many players are even willing to overlook issues like homogenization when the gameplay just looks cool visually when they're playing it. Much like the old RPGs and MMOs of the olden times, having unique gameplay styles where everyone brings something totally different to the table is part of a bygone era we'll likely not return to. Ultimately, there is no right or wrong answer here. Online live service games especially are simply at the whims of mass community sentiment and will gravitate towards whatever trends in popularity. Monster Hunter is the latest victim to get caught in the endless balancing treadmill. To some extent, balance in games is as much a community problem as it is a design problem. Sometimes community sentiment just doesn't match up to reality. This is where the friction between minimal viability and equalized performance comes from. Theoretically, there shouldn't be any problem as long as every weapon can clear all the content to a reasonable degree, especially in a cooperative game like Monster Hunter. There shouldn't be any need to compare yourself to someone else. And yet there is no shortage of drama over which weapons do the most damage and which ones clear quests slower or faster, or which ones have the strongest toolkit, or which ones need to get buffed or get mechanical changes. I imagine from the developer perspective it's quite hard to deal with. But anyway, I digress. Regardless of any perceived problem with any given game balance, there is probably still a game for you. If you prefer those older games with unique gameplay niches, they're still there for you, and you can always grab some friends and get that experience again. That's all from me for now. See ya. Thank you to the channel members. You too can join and become a member of Serving Hunt. Also join my Discord. We have lots of fun discussions there. Okay, I love you. Bye-bye.